In this tutorial, we're going to look at culture in the workplace. Culture comes into sharpest focus in human interactions, and one of the greatest arenas for such interaction is when people are working together. So in this tutorial, we are going to examine the impact of culture on a variety of work-related behaviors and the underlying values associated with those behaviors. We will look at 3 dimensions of cultural differences that have particular implications for the workplace. The concept of power, the attitude toward uncertainty and the unknown, and the concept of the source of status. The attitude of a society toward inequality, or how cultures deal with people's different levels of status and their access to power, is referred to as power distance. Power distance is especially evident when people are working together, particularly in the role of relationship of a person in charge and their subordinates. Here are brief descriptions of the 2 poles of this concept, high and low power distance. High power distance. People in these cultures accept that inequalities in power and status are natural or existential. In the same way they accept that some people are smarter than others, people accept that some will have more power and influence than others. Those with power tend to emphasize it, to hold it close and not delegate or share it, and to distinguish themselves as much as possible from those who do not have power. They are, however, expected to accept the responsibilities that go with power, to look after those beneath them. Subordinates are not expected to take any initiative and are closely supervised. Here, in this slide, are characteristics of behaviors that reflect an attitude of high power distance. People are less likely to question the boss because there is more fear of displeasing the boss in high power distance cultures. Elitism is the norm because it is normal to emphasize distinctions between the boss and subordinates. Those in power have special privileges in high power distance cultures. There are greater wage differences between managers and subordinates. Workers prefer precise instructions from superiors and close supervision. The visible exercise of power is common to these cultures. Bosses are independent, subordinates are dependent. There is an unequal distribution of power. Freedom of thought could get you into trouble, and independence is not valued in subordinates. Less social mobility is the norm, which keeps those with and without power separated. The chain of command is sacred because rank must be respected. You should not go around people. The pecking order is clearly established. There is a need to show who has the power. Management style is authoritarian and paternalistic. Bosses are supposed to wield their power. Interaction between boss and subordinate is formal, which emphasizes the power gap. Low power distance. People in these cultures see inequalities in power and status as largely artificial. It is not natural, though it may be convenient, that some people have power over others. Those with power, therefore, tend to de-emphasize it, to minimize the differences between themselves and their subordinates, and to delegate and share power as much as possible. Subordinates are rewarded for taking the initiative and do not like close supervision. Here is a list of characteristics and behaviors that reflect an attitude of low power distance. Students question teachers because superiors do not have to be deferred to. Freedom of thought is encouraged, and no one is threatened by independence or thinking for oneself. The chain of command is mainly for convenience. Power differences are not emphasized. Interaction between boss and subordinate is more informal because the distance is minimized. Subordinates and bosses are interdependent. We're all equal here, so we all depend on each other. It's okay to question the boss because he's just another worker. And the management style is consultative and democratic because we are all in this together. Power distance is de-emphasized. Cultural misunderstandings can occur when people from a low power distance culture and a high power distance culture work together. This could be in any environment where people are working together, including a church or a religious group, a community group, an office, or a business, or when working with government or local officials. Because power distinctions are not recognized in the same way, probably the most common occurring misunderstanding is that a person from a low power distance culture can inadvertently communicate a lack of respect for the person and authority of those in power or in a high power distance culture. It can cause tension and relationship problems when low power distance working practice is applied in a high power distance work environment. For example, questioning the boss. In low power distance cultures, it is normal to practice to ask the boss for some clarification or to give input into a decision that has been made. But in many high power distance cultures, bosses are not used to having their decisions questioned, or worse, having to explain them to subordinates. In these cultures, bosses make decisions and subordinates carry them out. And if there are questions, they would normally be raised in a very delicate way and always through the proper channels. This doesn't mean that bosses are unapproachable or infallible, but you do have to think long and hard before challenging those in power, and then do so in appropriate ways. Taking initiative without asking the boss first. In many low power distance cultures, it is a good thing to see something that needs to be done and just do it without waiting to be told. In high power distance cultures, that kind of behavior is often interpreted as taking power that hasn't been given to you. You have made a decision that wasn't yours to make, and in the process, usurped and threatened the authority of the person who is supposed to make this decision. In cultures where power is highly centralized and closely guarded, taking initiative is a risky business. Being too informal with those in power. In high power distance cultures, interaction between the high ranks and the lower ranks, or any mixing of these ranks, is relatively uncommon and tends to be quite formal. People in power don't just spend social time with their subordinates on the spur of the moment. Most people in that situation would feel quite uncomfortable and awkward. In these cultures, people of higher status tend not to regard themselves as being like their workers, nor do they want to be seen that way. The greater the gulf between the high ranks and the lower echelons, the better for everyone. Bypassing the chain of command. In many cultures, bypassing the chain of command will not be appreciated. The proper thing to do would be to discuss an issue with the person directly above you in the chain of command, not to go directly to a higher level boss. If the one above you doesn't respond, then you could either announce that you are going to talk to the boss or ask the one directly above you to do so. If he still does nothing, then you can go to the higher boss with relative impunity, having gone through the proper channels. People from low power distance cultures can find the formality, the lack of independence, and the more authoritarian management style frustrating to work with, as it can seem inefficient and counterproductive. Conversely, people from high power distance cultures can find people from low power distance cultures disrespectful, pushy, threatening, and disruptive of the working harmony. If you are working cross-culturally, it is important to take time to get to know your new community or coworkers and how they work together. Don't just assume that you know how to work in another culture without a time of learning first. It is very helpful to take a back seat in the beginning to observe and learn with an open mind and a positive attitude. Don't try to jump in and improve things or change things in the early days, but take time to learn how things work first. Recognize the fact that things do get done and that the society does work, but that things get done differently to what you are used to. Eventually, if you go carefully and learn as you go, you will find that you become more like the local people and are able to fit in and to work well with them. Another dimension of culture that particularly affects the workplace is how people respond to the inherent uncertainty of life. This uncertainty creates anxiety in all cultures, with characteristic responses: technology to control uncertainty in the natural world, laws, regulations, and procedures to control the uncertainty in human behavior, and religious rituals to address people's spiritual uncertainty. While all societies feel threatened by uncertainty, some feel more threatened by it than others. Depending on their attitudes, different cultures have developed different ways of dealing with it. The two extremes, called high uncertainty avoidance and low uncertainty avoidance, are described here. High uncertainty avoidance. Cultures characteristic of high uncertainty avoidance feel especially anxious about the uncertainty in life and try to limit and control it as much as possible. They have more laws, regulations, policies, and procedures, and a greater emphasis on obeying them. They also have a strong tendency toward conformity, hence predictability. People take comfort in structure, systems, and expertise. Anything that can blunt or even neutralize the impact of the unexpected. The unknown is frightening. These behaviors are more commonly associated with high uncertainty avoidance cultures. Punctuality is highly valued because sticking to the schedule is comforting. People should keep emotions under control because when people lose control of emotions, anything can happen. Different is dangerous because it is unpredictable or unknown. People expect more formality in interactions because that assures a certain order in the unfolding of interactions. The chain of command should never be bypassed. Going around the structure threatens its very survival, and where would we be without structure? People believe less in common sense. They are more likely to listen to people with expertise. The common person couldn't know that much. Conflict in organizations should be eliminated as it threatens the smooth running of things. People change jobs infrequently because stability is sought and provided for. Change is threatening. A general sense of anxiety prevails because the fear of the unknown. People accept authority more readily. Authority is comforting because it guarantees order and keeps things under control. Rules should not be broken. They are the foundation of order. Risks should be avoided. They are inherently unsettling because they involve the unknown. Low uncertainty avoidance is described this way. People in these cultures do not feel quite so threatened nor anxious about uncertainty, and therefore do not have such a strong need to limit or control it. They seek to legislate fewer areas of human interaction and tolerate differences better. They feel boxed in by too much structure or too many systems. They are curious rather than frightened by the unknown and are not uncomfortable leaving things to chance. Life is interesting, but not especially daunting. These behaviors are more commonly associated with low uncertainty avoidance cultures. People change jobs with more frequency because change is not so frightening. People more readily accept dissent because differing views are nothing to be frightened of. Nothing is set in stone. Take things one day at a time. You can't know or control the future anyway. People should let their emotions out. There's nothing to fear from emotions. Conflict in organizations is natural and nothing to be afraid of. Order doesn't break down or get undermined that easily. Differences are interesting. The unknown is not frightening. A general sense of well-being prevails, and there isn't that much fear of what can't be understood or controlled. People accept authority less readily. Authority is limiting, and control is not that comforting. Rules can be broken if it makes sense for pragmatic reasons. Rules can be limiting. There's nothing inherently satisfying about rules. Risks are opportunities, since the unknown isn't particularly worrying. Risks are not to be feared. This area of culture, just as with power distance, can cause tension in the workplace where people with different views are trying to work together. It will help you greatly if you face conflict or issues when working with people of another culture to consider whether differences in uncertainty avoidance or another deeper cultural attitude may be a root cause. Remember to ask local friends for advice. Tell them you are still learning how to relate and that you need their help. If you make a mistake, don't worry too much. Explain, apologize, and then move on. Another work-related cultural area to think about is how people come by their status in their organizations and in society and in general. This concept is related to power distance in some ways and also to individualism collectivism. The two poles of this concept are sometimes referred to as achieved status and ascribed status, or as doing cultures and being cultures. We will briefly describe them. Achieved status or doing cultures. In these doing cultures, people are looked up to and respected because of their personal and especially their professional accomplishments. You get ahead into positions of power and influence by virtue of your achievements and performance. Your status is earned and not merely a result of birth, age, or seniority. You are hired because of your record of success, not on the basis of family, background, connections, or the school you attended. People aren't particularly impressed with titles. Education is important, but not the mere fact of it. You have to have done something with your knowledge. Status is not automatic and can be lost if you stop achieving. Ascribed status or being cultures. In these being cultures, a certain amount of status is built into the person. It is automatic and therefore difficult to lose. You are looked up to because of the family and the social class you were born into, because of your affiliations and the membership in which important groups, and later because of your age and your seniority. The school you went to and the amount of education you received also confer status, whether or not you did well in school or have done anything with your education. Titles are important and should always be used. You are pressed to justify the power, respect, and deference that you automatically enjoy. You cannot lose your status completely, but you can lose respect by not realizing your potential.